Welcome to today's episode. Well, you are about to get an inside view on a journey that many people in our culture are going through, many kids are wrestling with, and it's the journey of transitioning. But this is a story of not only transitioning, but it's a story of detransitioning. Jenna Parker, who is a 25-year-old young woman from Atlanta, Georgia, young businesswoman, has walked through the process of both transitioning and detransitioning. It's an unbelievably redemptive story. It's a story of hope, but it also is a story that helps us understand what is going on in the minds of so many children. You're going to hear her talk a little bit about what was going on in her elementary years, what was really happening in her middle school years, where we're seeing so much of this wrestle happen, and how this journey impacted both her high school and college years. If you don't think that this is something that's relatable to you, I want to beg to differ. This is a story about identity, and it's going to touch you in places that you cannot believe. So let's lean in and be informed. Hey, Jenna, welcome to The Informed Parent. I'm so glad you could be here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Suzanne.
Well, you have quite the powerful story, and we're going to jump in. It goes in a lot of different directions. It's very complex, and so I'm really looking forward to you being able to share it. But before we get started, I would love for you to give just a little bit of your personal background, where you grew up, your family, just a little bit about you, because I think it does give some context to the conversation we're going to have going forward.
Sure thing. I'm 25 years old, young professional working around the Atlanta area, and I am a twin. I also have an older sister, and I was raised in the suburbs of North Atlanta. Also went to college in Atlanta.
Okay. So you're from there and stayed there. That is not normal in Atlanta, is it? So here's the big story, the overarching story here is that you transitioned and you've detransitioned. And that is a journey that you've been walking through over the course of quite a bit of time. And I know that there are so many questions, a lot of concerns with what's going on culturally. But there's so many questions that I think people have, and the power of testimony is, I think, the best way to learn. And so I'm so thrilled that you're willing to tell the story. But I want to just sort of give you the floor to talk about your journey and when it started. Give us a little bit, and then we'll go deeper into the ideologies and the things that you've learned from it as we go.
Sure thing. Absolutely. It is a very relevant thing to be discussing today. And my story is, just one of many. So there's not that many people who have detransitioned, who are speaking out and have a voice in the space. So I am happy to just share my experience and speak on that. So I guess I'll start with just childhood. And then I am Jewish, so raised in a non-religious family, but we did have a bit of religion, but we didn't necessarily discuss what everything meant. It was very cultural, all the traditions. All of my family is Jewish, both my mom and my dad's side, that goes back for generations. So
Okay.
the holidays mean a lot, and temple was basically going every Sunday for Sunday school, every Tuesday for Hebrew school, and preparing for my bat mitzvah when I was 13. And during all of that, I was a very shy child. So, like I mentioned, I have a twin sister, I have an older sister, and they were by far more feminine than I was, or more comfortable expressing their femininity than I was. So, they danced, and I cried off the stage at my first recital when I was 3 years old. And I was not sporty. I never wanted to put myself out there because I had this like fear of failure, and I just didn't want to be in the spotlight. So, I was super shy. And when I was 7 years old, essentially, so which is super young, I got it into my head that I was gay, not really fully knowing what that meant, obviously, as a child, because that is something that a kid can't necessarily wrap their head entirely around. But it's a term that I heard often, and I just knew that there was something to it that I didn't understand. So there was a curiosity there. Every time people would talk about it, it would just be in like a hushed tone. People would laugh about it, and it was something that I knew was kind of, you shouldn't really be talking about, but everybody seems to know what it is except for me. And, it could be described as somebody who's funny or somebody you're making fun of. Like back in the day, people used the word gay for
Yeah.
that. So I remember asking my parents at 7, what does gay mean? And I remember their reply. Well, first they looked at each other with this like, look in their eye, like,
Shock.
what do we say?
Oh wow, we're here, right? Yeah.
Right. And I remember they said when a girl loves a girl and when a boy loves a boy, they said we have a family member who's gay, like it's completely okay to be gay. And I remember walking into school the next day and seeing my friend who's a girl and being like, I love her. And then I got into my head that I was gay from a really young age and didn't talk about it to anybody. So
So
it
you
just
weren't going
festered.
back talking to your parents. You weren't talking about
No,
it at all with anybody, but that seed was planted and
right.
it was growing and nobody really knew that.
Right. And maybe if I had had those conversations, things would have been different. But I think because I was internally like had this torment in myself of, I feel this way. I don't know, if I want to be that way. I don't know how to handle it. And I just didn't talk to anybody. I was already a really shy kid, like I mentioned. So I didn't feel like I could necessarily in a way. And it just festered. And that really, the festering and getting in my head and feeling that internal just kind of fight and battle,
Mm-hmm.
between this is who I am, this is who I think I am, but that's not okay in the world or whatever it might have been. I don't really understand it all, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like
Well, you
in
were
words, it's
young,
hard to.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I just felt like that was me for the longest time. I felt like I couldn't tell anybody. So I kind of had this like internal, secret. And I got used to that feeling. And we'll come back to that too, I'm sure,
Okay.
because um, just the fact that when you're any age, you gravitate towards what you are most comfortable with, what you're most familiar with, all those feelings that are familiar, not necessarily what's good for you. So that was my foundation of
Okay.
me in secret, just kind of like not really sure about myself, not sure about my own identity, and feeling like I had to hide, and also just like being internally conflicted. So I felt really comfortable by myself.
And then how did that, okay, you're 7 now, and then we go all the way into, oh my goodness, we're transitioning, but the journey between like the growth of that seed. I always like to say like it took root and then the shoot came up, but like what was that
Yeah.
journey? That was the seed that was planted, and then what?
And then I did tell people about that. So I wasn't yet questioning my gender, or maybe I was questioning my gender, but I didn't at all tap into that or tell anybody about it at the time. But I told people that I was gay. So I came out around the 14, 15. I was a freshman in high school.
Okay.
So at that point, I was like, this is who I am. Everybody's going to know it. And I am taking that on as my identity. I'm going to do the whole thing, cut my hair short. Not that that means that you're gay, but like
Right.
that
Right.
was like for me, like a huge deal at the time. So I started to feel, comfortable in that identity. I could more freely express myself without caring what people thought, type of thing. And eventually, I get to college, and
Can I ask you a question before we go to college? Because I'm
yeah.
curious. So at 14, 15, you're a freshman, let's say, in high
Hmm.
school, and you come out. Like, what was that accepted, affirmed? Like, what was the
Yes.
response to that? Because I think that's really important.
It is a really important conversation, I think, because at the time when I did tell my parents, I had a conversation with my mom, and it was actually like a crazy thing in my household this night because my friend, who was the only person who knew at the time, convinced me to tell my twin sister. So I told my twin sister, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, mom doesn't know, and I feel, bad keeping this secret. You have to tell her, or I'm gonna tell her." And then it was like she I wasn't ready necessarily, so it became this whole like thing for me, and I was kind of distraught and crying. And then my mom was like, hey, what's going on? And I told her like, I'm gay, and she goes, I know. So
Hmm.
it was completely just accepted, affirmed. And I do really, really wish that we had and we've talked about this as well, my mom and I, since, that it would have been a great idea if we had a conversation during that time, just one on one, about everything that I was feeling, everything that led up to it, all of the many years since I was 7 until I was 14, so 7 years, of those feelings. We didn't touch on any of that. So it was just accepted, and that was my new reality. So then I moved into it.
And then at school, it was accepted in your peer group by other adults in school. Was that, it was just no big deal, or were people like, hey, let's maybe chit chat about this?
Yes, I was not approached like that in any way. Everybody completely accepted, and it wasn't at all a conversation more in depth. And I do think that that falls on the parents, just to understand, where's your head at, like, where's this coming from, and what's really going on, regardless of the subject, whether it's gay or something else that's going on.
Right, just generally
Yeah.
speaking. Okay, so moving on. So now you get to college, and what happens? What happens? You've been walking now in this sort of chosen identity, for about 4 years, and now you're in college. So tell us a little bit of that story.
Absolutely. So, actually, prior to going to college, I struggled with my mental health. And this is something that was also in secret. That was kind of my cope at the time. So, I would put on a smiley face. Nobody really knew that I was going through anxiety and depression and just overwhelming feelings of just, suicidality, to be honest. Like, I had a really
Mm,
bad run in with that. Um, and I do remember having like a psychic attack, a spiritual attack,
mm,
that happened, around that subject. And I actually was checked into a facility.
okay.
So I didn't, it's a funny story because I didn't actually go. They wanted to check me in, but then my mom and I kind of fought it. I was over 18 at the time, so she didn't have rights over
The
me
authority
to.
to, yeah.
Right. So we had to get myself out of it because at the time, and this is completely on me, I was like, I have AP exams. Like, I can't do this. I needed help, but it also, wasn't necessarily the best place to have gone to anyways. So it is a blessing that I didn't stay there. But that is where my mindset was at the time. I was going through AP exams, life, distracted, but underlyingly not understanding how to handle my overwhelming emotions. So I was just kind of going with the flow, pretending like everything was okay. And I didn't really take into account my own future. I really couldn't picture it. I got into 2 schools. I just applied to 2 schools. One is a really good school, one is a okay school. And I went with the okay school without giving any thought to the really great school, because in my mind, I was like, I want to be in the city. I want to be different from everybody else. I want to get away from what everyone in my hometown is doing. So that was my mindset. I wasn't thinking clearly, about really what's next and what does this mean for me.
About your future and how all the things connected, purpose and all of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yep. So then I'm at college, and I begin to basically go into a different identity. I actually changed my name right in college, like right then and there, to something that was also feminine. But I didn't I didn't understand why I did that until like years later. I didn't even question it until years later about why I might have done that. But I really did do that because I was running away from my past. And that's kind of the theme of my entire transition. But again, I did not have the wherewithal to really stop and consider my actions and the consequences of my actions and what does this all mean for me and what am I really doing. So that is, again, where my mental state was at. So
Did your family know that you were changing your name also, or was that something that you were also hiding from them, or were you asking them to come along on the journey my new name is?
yes, I did ask them to use my new name, and they were they used it sometimes, but not really. They used it around other people who knew me by that. They used my like actual name otherwise, and it wasn't a point of like, stress for me at the
Right.
time.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, it wasn't all really discussed like why. I think maybe if they asked why, it was just like because I like it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then so you've changed your name, you've been walking in this identity. So at what point did it start to actually move into I am going to begin to physically change myself? Can you talk a little bit about that transition? Because I want to talk about the ideology and all the things you've discovered, but I think it's important to know the steps and the progress. If parents are listening, you're walking down a path, and the why behind all of this is not being pulled out. You're not
Right.
processing it. You're just walking down a path. So, can you share a little bit about how did it go into then from another new name to the actual physical transition?
So I did identify as non-binary first, and for anyone who doesn't know, non-binary is a gender identity, and people usually use pronouns that are they, them instead of she, her, or he, him. And at the time, my mindset was I don't feel like either. And I actually did go to a non-binary support group, so it was like all ages in Atlanta, and it was just an interesting time. A lot of you know anger, a lot of
Mm.
bitterness. And I will say that, and this is just me kind of speaking freely without a script, that all of this did overlap me having more like radicalized political views as well
Mm.
against like the man or whatever you want to call it. Um, so there was a piece of that as well in the non binary identity. So I am also having this sense of kind of control in my life because I'm asking people to use my they them pronouns. And it was something that looking back, I am so embarrassed by. But at the time, I felt so confident in it. And it came down to not feeling comfortable in my body. I would spend, just to paint a picture, I remember my roommate at the time told me that she woke up one morning while I was getting changed for school, and we all lived in, it was three of us in one room, and she just saw me with a binder, and I'll tell you what that is too, and trying on a million shirts and taking off a million shirts and like just stressed about it. So I did have distress about my body, and I was watching a bunch of YouTube videos at the time as well about just being non-binary and being transgender and what that looked like and how to pass as the opposite sex and things like that in the world. So a binder is a compression garment. So it basically takes your breasts and flattens them down like a really intense sports bra. And it does hinder your breathing. And you're not supposed to wear it for longer than a specific period of time. You're probably not supposed to wear it at all. But I had a couple of those that I wore every day, all day. So I was just really uncomfortable with my body. And at the same time, I'm being respected in this new identity. I was very affirmed, very praised. I felt special. I felt different. And that was kind of the voice that I was following at the time. And again, with like politics and identity politics, there is kind of that pedestal with those identities being lifted up because there's a victim mentality, and people want to appear as good people.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because when we talk about just the needs that you have, and the insecurity that you were dealing with, maybe young, right, and then and being the confusion with identity early on, and I mean not being confused with your identity, but just confusion in general around the idea of identity, coupled with some insecurity. And then
Yes.
those things grow. And it's interesting because we just did a couple of episodes on these 5 core needs. And so security and identity are there. But then the next thing is you were finding belonging.
Yeah.
Like there were people who wanted you because of the decisions you were making or the language you were using, or that you were finding belonging in that. And in that belonging, the security was growing. The identity was coming maybe a little bit more intact, at least for what you thought. Like you were moving in a direction. I'm more sure about this, and so I can move in a direction. And there was even some purpose in this,
Yeah.
And so when you start to think about all of these core needs that we have that are really meant to be filled by God, but you were finding these in places that had nothing to do with your faith, your identity, even in your family, really. You were finding them outside. And so it's so fascinating to listen to you almost walk directly through these past couple episodes that we just talked about. And so, in terms of belonging, once you're sort of in that, are you then being affirmed like you need to go physically? Like, was there a invitation to move into physical transition, or was that your own idea?
Well, it was my own idea, but it, like you had just mentioned, with belonging and community and me relying on that, which is a house of cards at the end of the day. You can't rely on other people to be there for how you need or want. So I developed some manic behavior. I developed chasing these highs that I would get, and honestly, I was just chasing highs. So for me, changing my name, which I did several times, and making physical, changes to myself, being able to post it, being able to get likes. And I know it sounds stupid, but that was really what I was kind of thriving on. But obviously, that stuff doesn't last. It's very impermanent, and you get it, and then it goes back down. So I did develop some manic behavior that I saw within myself that was completely unrelated. I would reorganize my room like out of nowhere, like crazy, and I did get just completely wrapped up in smoking weed like 24/7, which started one time on the weekends. And mind you, growing up, I never thought that I would even touch it. I, you know, not related necessarily, but I was always a really good student, always loved school, always follower of the rules. And then, but when I did get to college, I was making friends with people and in relationships with people who were smoking. So I started once on the weekends, then it happened, on the weekdays, and then it happened during class. And then when my friendships and my relationships ended, it was by myself. And your brain doesn't work right on those drugs either. So in my mind, it really felt like, okay, I smoked one time. This was how my logic worked, which is completely illogical. I smoked one time. Okay, now I don't feel like myself. The way to get back to myself is smoke a different time. And I just kept going in
Yeah.
this rabbit hole. And I was just so physically not there, to be honest. Mentally, all of that.
So you're in that cycle, but then are you also taking hormones?
I
Like
started hormones when I was very high. So
you were you were high like the first time you took hormones?
yeah. So yeah, that was really bad. And I was alone. It was just really low, and I had just in my manic behavior, I ended a relationship with a girl in college, and she told me, "Don't don't take this now, the testosterone." I had just picked up the vial, and I felt like I needed it so bad. Like there was just something in my mind that was like, "This is the real you. This is the true you." So I, went upstairs, called my friend on FaceTime at the time who is transgender and has been giving, um, injections to themselves for years. So, and I was afraid of needles all my entire life, but I was numb. I was absolutely numb. So I, gave myself my first injection. I um, smoked, I passed out. And that was what happened. I was moving in that day to somewhere on campus. I was living there for free at the time because I didn't want to move home. I separated myself from my family, so I got an on-campus job that was really low effort for me, and I did that for the purpose at the time of just not going home over the summer. So that was what happened.
And I'm just going to tell the listeners and the watchers right now, this is such a redemptive story, but it's so important to hear this because there's a progression, and the signs of help me are all over the place here. I mean,
Yeah.
you're hiding, but they're there. So let's sort of fast forward to, we've gone from hormones to now. What was the full extent of your transition? And then I'd like to sort of swing back to some of the ideology.
Yes, absolutely. Can I start with going to gender therapy and kind of like getting the letter
Yeah.
for hormones? So
Yeah.
I did go to see a gender therapist. I was also in several other support groups. I know I mentioned the non-binary support group, but I was in several others. And I went to this gender therapist who basically just told me, if you say that you're trans, then you are trans. So here's your letter. And I personally wanted to go to a therapist to get a letter, to give it to the clinician in order to get hormones, so that I knew for sure, because I didn't know for sure. And some
So you
places,
were looking for authority. You were looking for someone
yes,
who had the authority to make a judgment call. You were seeking that out. You were not assuming. You're like, please, someone
yes.
tell me. Yeah.
I
Wow.
did know at the time, though, that she was an affirming counselor. So I held bias within the search for her, and found her deliberately. So I knew that she would affirm me,
Okay.
but I also went into that actual discussion with her as like, hey, I need an actual diagnosis. After she told me, like, if you say you're trans, and she like whipped out the DS5, and she even said, like, this is not standard, it doesn't really mean anything, but because you want it, like, I'll do it. And she went through this checklist really fast. And prior to her going through the checklist, I did kind of come in and just vent about my life and everything I was feeling, and I was a wreck. I was just crying. I was obviously not okay. And after all of that, she was like, I don't want to hold this above your head. If you say you're trans, you're trans. Here you go. So there was no deeper questioning, no like, hey, you're not okay, you need more therapy, there's something underlyingly that you're running away from, or whatever it might be. So and just for the record as well, I think I recently listened to a podcast, and trauma is kind of like when you process things. It's not necessarily like what is afflicted to you. It's kind of, but it could be. But it's kind of like what's your processing. Did you have support at that time? Were you alone at that time? What did that look like?
Mm.
And how, did that hurt really build up? So even though, like, in my childhood, it might have been really small things compared to something else that other people may have gone through that's been huge, I didn't have that support. So I was feeling a lot of things at the time, and very emotional. And,
That's really interesting to think about. That it wasn't this massive big event, but it was the pent up feelings that didn't have a place to be released.
exactly.
Right? That was the trauma. Yeah.
Exactly. So I got my letter, and I went to the clinician to get my first, dose of testosterone, and they gave me some blood tests, but it's very experimental. The dose of testosterone that I was injecting into myself is obviously not natural for a female. So I started injecting myself. I was on it for over 3 years, 3 years, 2 months. And then 9 months into starting testosterone, I did get a double mastectomy as well. And then I changed my name not long after that as well, legally. I did change it back.
And
But
you changed it back. But so
yeah,
so the double mastectomy, was that did this therapist refer you to someone?
I did my own research, actually. I didn't stick with that therapist. I only saw her twice. And I did my own research. I found a place that was in Charlotte, I believe, and it's meant for that. So it is just a surgical center that is like a queer place, and they just do these surgeries. So that's where I went, and it was right when um, COVID started. It was in March of 2020 when that happened.
And I think I remember you telling me that in reflection, when you think back about that center, that every single person in there was either gay or trans. Is that right?
That is true. I don't know about the actual surgeon herself. I want to say that she is trans, but everybody in there, yeah, there were transgender and gay nurses, and yes,
And
everybody in there.
your family knew that you were gonna have a double mastectomy and that this was going to a surgical place. Is that correct?
That's right. And I do believe that my family was also very manipulated by the
Mm-hmm.
system,
Talk
because
about that for a
parents,
minute. Yeah.
absolutely, parents are told that if you do not affirm your child, then that child is going to be just worse off. And, they say, would you rather have a transgender son or a deceased daughter? And we don't affirm eating disorders. When did this become the medical standard? If a young girl has an eating disorder, self-esteem issue, something with their body, you don't affirm it and say, yeah, you really are bigger than you should be, and you really should, continue in this way that you are, and good for you. Affirming that lifestyle. But for this, you affirm, yeah, it's true. Who you were born to be, that's not who you should be. Because when you praise it, when you affirm it, and when you say, like, yeah, you should get surgery, or you should make these changes, and you know or maybe it's just unspoken, and you don't say anything because you're afraid to. Because I think that was really what happened with my parents, is they were just afraid to speak out
Just
because
afraid.
of the consequences, or the perceived consequences. But it really tells that child, like, yeah, you should change yourself. You would be better like that. That's more fitting to who you really are. So it gives a very clear message to someone in distress that, okay, I'll change myself, sure. Um,
And I think that's a huge distinction, because it's not just affirming what the child wants. It's affirming the fact that there really is a problem with you, and you would be better off
right,
if you were someone else, or if so. That the affirmation is far more than affirming just an idea or a surgery. It's affirming the fact that you're a mistake. Like, you're a mistake, right?
right,
And then if you're approaching this from a spiritual position, which you all weren't at the time, but bigger than that, it's that God made a mistake, right? So I know
right.
that you've navigated some of that now, but that affirmation, when you're affirming something that just is not true, but out of your own fear as parents, we've all done it, right? In some shape, form, or fashion. When you parent out of fear instead of faith, then you're gonna get tangled up in some things that are not healthy for your child. If you don't have a foundation of faith, it is very difficult in this world to not at times parent out of fear. And so I
Absolutely.
understand the fact that they were sort of caught in their own confusion, because they didn't have the truth as an anchor, maybe,
Yeah,
right?
I think so. And I
Yeah.
do remember at the time, like that night of before the surgery, going into it, just being like, I don't want this, but I feel like I need it, which is a clear sign that, like, okay, something's going on in my head. It's, mental illness is going on. I need to actually sit down. This is not a good time to have this surgery, but I did go through with it. And this is also the point when I was deeply involved with New Age, which, for anyone who is not familiar with that, it is new thought practices, some based in Buddhism, some in Kabbalah, and some from probably other things. But it's using crystals and tarot cards and witchcraft and basically idolatry, and an underlying belief system that you can manifest your own reality, that you are God and you can create whatever you want. So being able to, because I didn't actually transition genders, but my reality shifted. Everybody perceived me as such. So it gave me this false sense of control as well. And it did kind of support this ideology that I was living on, that said, you have the power, which is absolutely not true, and can really get you in some trouble.
Okay, parents, that is a huge story that we just listened to, and there's more to come. But I want to end with this today. You listened to someone who a little seed got planted very, very young, and she kept it inside. But I say this often when I'm teaching parents. It's by the time you see the shoot pop up and you start to see the fruit in someone's life, that seed has been planted, and the roots grow before the shoots and the fruit take place. And so that festering that she talked about for the 7 years, there was stuff growing inside of her that eventually it shot up and started to flourish in her life. Fruit started to show up. So when you Listen to someone who's from the age of 7 all the way through, what did she say, 20. This real journey of, I'm going to start to transition in the physical part of my life. There was a long journey of someone who was seeking to be heard, seeking to be known, seeking to maybe share themselves, and she didn't know how to do it. And some children, it's easier than others to pull out of them what's on the inside. But remember, if you'll go back all the way to the first podcast that I ever did for the Informed Parent, we talked about the definition of a parent. And the definition of a parent literally means to bring forth. Our job is to bring forth who God designed, to bring forth who He's created in our children, and they're all different, and they need to process differently. So I hope you're encouraged by listening to her story. I hope that you are hearing from her desire to not just be heard, but to be corrected along the way. And so we're going to wrap up this episode, but there's going to be a part 2 coming when she talks a little bit more about some of the things that made her susceptible to fall deeper into this than maybe others. And so there's going to be some real tangible tools for you to use in this next episode. So hope this one helped you parent with partner, disciple with direction, and leave an intentional legacy. And we're looking forward to the next one next week.